My name's Sharon Flahaug and I've been the team doctor or CMO for the Waratahs for the last 20 years. I'm a sport and exercise physician and I started with the Waratahs back at the end of 1999. In those days it was Super 12 and I've stayed with the team through to the current format. When I started it was pretty much the start of professionalism, so 99, but the start of professionalism was in 96, but still some of the players at that time had often come from a work situation as opposed to straight from school. At the time I think I saw the moment in time, and now when I look back I start to see the journey, and I've seen a number of players who started in the academy, worked their way through to Waratahs, then Wallabies, and then since then have gone on to become fathers, coaches, administrators. So it's been really a lifetime of involvement, and with that has come many stories, but obviously incredible number of highs and sometimes also too many lows. I always say that the opportunity to work with a team like this is the opportunity to experience just a little bit of that high and a little bit of the low that players go through. What we ask of a player or anyone that commits an elite sport is we ask of them the best of themselves every day. So they're basically asked to bring their best to training and to bring their best to the team situation, and to know that the better person makes the better rugby player. And I've seen a lot over that years. I think someone's done the figures on how many actual Waratah caps there've been in the time that I've been there, which I think is well over 200, maybe well over 250 caps. And obviously a number of staff as well, but I think I always reflect on the very start of the season, so it's the start of the new pre-season at the moment, and there's all this excitement about getting a signing, new player into the squad, and then what I see through that journey is how many of them give their all and give their everything through that pre-season, and then some of them don't make it, like some of them get injuries that keep them out of the game for a whole season, and then they never get re-signed, or an injury that keeps them out of that first trial, and then the story where sometimes if you don't make that first trial you actually never get the opportunity to play the game. So I think the newspapers always tell the story of those that are the most famous and those that make it to the highest level, but sometimes there's a lot to be said about the story for the person that never actually makes it. In saying that, I'd still say that I'd encourage anyone to achieve at their best, because the skills that you get through, disappointment and getting to the highest level are sort of what make you the better person. Every year you have a plan, and that plan always involves you come up with themes, you come up with catch cries, defining values of the team, but we know that every person, both in management and in the team, are there to get to that Super Rugby final. And so through my time on 3 occasions we got to that final, 2005, 2008 and then 2014. Interestingly, all those finals were against the Crusaders. The 2 first ones were in Christchurch, and the 4th one, which we won, was in Sydney, which was amazing. And in reflecting on that, it was an incredible time winning that 2014 final. But for someone like me who'd been there for a long time, it was more than just a moment in time. I think I remember at that moment turning around, and I think there are 2 or 3 faces I see, but clearly I saw Nathan Gray and Al Baxter, and just the emotion on their faces was just everything that had gone before seemed to be made worthy by that 2014 final. And so for many people it is just a moment in time, but I think for all those Waratahs that had come before, and you're questioned along the way, I think for all those Waratahs they felt that they had been fighting for that goal as much as anyone else, even though that it wasn't their year. We had a player once, Matt Rogers, who came from rugby league. I'm sure many remember him, but I remember one time having a chat with him about both himself and his father, and his father was a great rugby league player, and saying, you know, he had never had the opportunity to play in that grand final. And so many players are there. It's quite interesting. Some players might be there for a year and they get that one opportunity, and others can have their whole career with a team and never get the opportunity to play in the final. Other highlights is just camaraderie with the team, within a team. I think I found out pretty quickly that not only do they like the game of rugby, they like a game in any shape or form, whether it be playing tricks on each other during team times, playing tricks at meal time, anything is a game. And so I often remember one time a number of the skits that they did with the players. We were sat down one time, Ewan McKenzie was the coach, and he sort of said, I've had some serious news come through, and I need you to sit and watch this video footage. Pretty sure it was Stephen Hoyles that set up Sean Byrne to do a photo shoot for the Bachelor of the Year or the GQ magazine, and there were a series of photos and video footage with Sean posing to the cameras with the teddy bear, with the fireman's hat on, with all sorts of paraphernalia. And of course it was just a setup, and I think Sean found out about that pretty quickly on in the team meeting. I think the exciting thing about that was the whole team just erupted into laughter, and I think we went out, they had a great captain's run, and I think we beat the Highlanders that week. So I think all sport, but in particular my journey, is just absolutely littered with hilarious stories about the things that both management and players have done along the way, which are just part of the game. I think the obvious challenge is often the management of players with injuries and then recurrent injury. I always find that sometimes the saddest thing, you know, that there are probably 2 or 3 occasions that come to mind pretty quickly where a player had been out of the game for a number of months, up to 9 months, with like an anterior cruciate ligament injury, and then they came back, and within a month or so of that return they ruptured the ligament on the other side. So in the end those players end up spending up to 2 years out of the game, and that's critical for a couple of reasons. For a lot of players you only get a certain number of years that you're going to be in the sport at that high level, and so that can be career ending. They don't get the opportunity, or they don't get the re-signing, and I find that really difficult. And those players live in the rehabilitation or the physio room all year round while the rest of the players come and get strapped and train, and it's very, very taxing for them to maintain their upbeat commitment to getting back on the field. And there are multiple examples of injuries where, you know, a player might have the greatest pre-season and they go into the first trial, everyone's talking about how they're going to make the top team that year, and then they get an injury in that first trial and then it takes them out, and then they don't get another opportunity for the rest of the year. So in saying that, then someone's like, it becomes an opportunity for someone else, so then you have the happiness with the other person. So their journey's so up and down, and with the players it's trying to not let them get too despondent, and actually go through a period where they are able to maintain commitment and stay all the way through with the injury, and then come back, and then when you actually see them come back and do great things is so just so satisfactory, so satisfying. And I always used to use some of those examples. Dave Dennis is one of those people where he had an amazing career with the Waratahs, and he himself was one of those players where he went through a shoulder reconstruction which kept him out for 6 months, then a few months later ruptured his cruciate, and then within 4 weeks I think of coming back from the one leg, he came back from the other, he ruptured his other cruciate, and so he ended up being out for, I think it was something like 2 years. And then his story, he then had an incredibly successful career with the Waratahs, ended up captaining the Waratahs in that 2014 year, and he's now overseas playing and still going strong. And his story, he even would take the time sometimes to talk to other players when they went through that journey. of injury. I think seasons can be really challenging. We have had a few seasons where we've lost on a number of occasions throughout the season, and it's a really interesting journey how we all behave through that. Periods of indecision where we don't know who the next coach might be, or we don't know who the rest of the staff can be, and I think that's a really challenging time for all of our behaviours. Security in winning and success in winning can often, make times much easier for everyone, but this is the sort of sport that you ask, like, nothing less than winning is ever acceptable. And I remember I talked to the doctor that looked after the Brumbies just after they won, and I think it was maybe after the 2008 final, and I sort of said, we got all that way to the final and then we didn't win, and I was just gutted. And he said to me at the time, he just said, it's like that every time, like, unless you win, you're so incredibly disappointed. And so you have this life, like I've had 20 years of this life that we've won the competition on one occasion, had 3 finals, and then a number of seasons where you don't, but you keep, as soon as it's a funny year, as soon as the Super Rugby finishes, which is usually, like, it used to be back in May, but in June, July and up until August, as soon as the competition finishes, you set a reset button for the following year. So you spend most of the rest of the year planning for the following year and then reset again at the end of the season, whereas most of us live in this world where we build towards Christmas and New Year and then reset on January the 1st. I think that's very different. Your whole life, for 20 years, my whole life has been committed to that reset button at the end of the Super Rugby and then planning for victory the following year. I think it was an incredibly hard decision to move away from the Waratahs. Even makes me a bit emotional now. Dear, I thought I'd get over that. So it's been part of my family for 20 years, and but I think it's a good thing that I am moving on because I've got interest in a lot of other areas. So Etienne du Preez has worked with me at the Waratahs for the last 3 to 4 years, and you do have to create a succession plan, and I do think you have to open the door for someone else to come through. So for me, I've finished in that particular role, but in closing that door, some other doors have opened for me. So I'm now going to look after the Australian Wallaroos. I actually did have a career in women's rugby before the Waratahs, so I'm returning to that space. So I looked after they were called the New Zealand Women's Rugby Union team back when I looked after them, but they're now called the Black Ferns. So now I'm really excited about women's rugby, which I think is accelerating its pace, and both in support and in the journey that the women are taking. So their skills level is increasing at a phenomenal rate. So that's really exciting. And then I've also just recently been appointed to the board of the International Rugby Players Association. And the reason I'm so excited about that is one of their main focuses is about player welfare. So in my 20 years, I've seen a journey of professional rugby, and there's been a number of things that I've been quite passionate about. One is mental health. Now, this is mental health in more than just the elite sports space, but it's mental health in the community. But in particular, from my perspective, it's in rugby, because we talk about this player that we ask the very best of every day, and so we ask for the extremes of emotion and the extremes of effort, and I think that makes it very, very difficult for them at times. That story where one day you're the rooster and the next day you're the feather duster, like everything is on social media. Every good game or not so good game is on the media, and so I think it's a very difficult journey for them in regards sort of anxiety. So mental health I'm very passionate about. Also injury prevention. So I think we're getting closer and closer to being able to develop prevention programs in regards to injury. And during my time, that athlete has, certainly at the start of professionalism, the rugby player got larger. That's kind of plateaued for a while, but we need to make them more resilient to injury, and I think we're getting closer to being able to do that. And I think there's a number of warm-up strategies and things that are now in place that I think will help us in that area. The player transition area, so when a player who's been, sometimes 10 years in a professional sport, and then all of a sudden they find themselves looking for a job that they're generally 10 years older than the other person that's getting the equivalent job. So I think my experience is I've seen a lot of those players now retire, and notice that there are certainly some who it's very difficult the first 5 years after rugby. So my involvement is at an international players level on the board of IRP, and they have an agreement, or are in consultation with World Rugby about the strategies in place there, whether it come to competitions, whether it come to player welfare things, particularly in regards to concussion. So that's really exciting as well. And then I've also got my ongoing work in sport and exercise medicine, just in my private practice. Just recently I was in Japan for the Rugby World Cup, and part of that is, it's called the Medical Commission Conference, which is as part of the World Rugby Strategy. And I had this moment where I actually realised, after having been in Australia and working in Super Rugby, about what an amazing game rugby is. Like, it's played on a world stage, but not only that, it's played in more than 120 countries in the world. So at this medical commission there was representatives from 60 countries who all played rugby. And in fact, some of those countries, there were 50% female and 50% male playing the sport. I sat down at breakfast one day and there was the CMO from Senegal, another guy from Tunisia, someone from participation in Morocco, and they're all speaking French because that was their common language. So I sat down for breakfast with them, but I had that moment where I just think it is a truly international game. So if someone chooses to play rugby, there's 120 countries in the world where you can go and decide that you're going to go down to the local rugby club and join up to play. It's also known as the game for all shapes and sizes, and there is a place on a rugby field in any team for anyone of any shape and size, and I think that's also an amazing thing about rugby. And then the community is incredible. So from my involvement in 20 years, I think it doesn't matter where I go, I seem to run into someone who I've met somewhere along the way through my connection with rugby, and that's at all levels of the game.